My son demanded my house. When I refused, his eyes darkened. Then I'll find another way. That night, a truck with no license plates pulled up to my house. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with the time you are currently at. The front door slammed with such force that my coffee mug rattled against the counter. Jonah burst through the doorway like a man fleeing flames. His face flushed crimson, tie loosened and hanging askew. He didn't bother with greetings. "Dad, Sarah went absolutely insane today about money." His voice cracked with exhaustion. "Says the neighbor just got a brand new Lexus, while we're stuck driving the beat-up Honda." I kept stirring the mashed potatoes, letting the familiar rhythm calm my own startled nerves. The meatloaf had 15 minutes left in the oven, filling the kitchen with the aroma of home. "Son, patience builds character. You work harder than most men I know." Jonah paced between the kitchen table and refrigerator, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the linoleum I'd installed myself 20 years ago. "Easy for you to say, Dad. You don't wake up every morning to a wife who constantly compares you to other husbands." I opened the oven door, checking the golden brown crust forming on dinner. Steam escaped in warm clouds that briefly fogged my glasses. "Main thing is those beautiful grandchildren are healthy and fed." "Healthy doesn't pay for private school." Jonah collapsed into the chair where he'd sat for thousands of family meals. "Sarah wants everything the neighbors have. New car, kitchen renovation, vacation to Europe." Setting to plates on the familiar oak table, I studied my son's face. Worry lines had deepened around his eyes since Christmas. His mother would have recognized that particular expression of defeat. What triggered today's argument? Rebecca's mom picked her up in a Tesla. "A Tesla? Dad?" Jonah's laugh held no humor. "Sarah spent the entire afternoon researching how much they cost, then announced, 'I'm not providing enough for our family.'" I pulled the meatloaf from the oven, its surface perfectly caramelized. "Your wife forgets that good things take time to build." She threatened divorce again. The words fell flat between us. Said she won't waste her prime years married to a man without ambition. The confession hung in the air while I carved generous slices, steam rising from each portion. Martha had taught me this recipe during our first year of marriage, back when we could barely afford ground beef once a week. "Coffee is fresh," I said, filling his cup with the dark roast he preferred. "Tell me what happened after Rebecca got home." Jonah accepted the plate gratefully. Finally meeting my eyes, Sarah cornered me in the garage, waving her phone with pictures of luxury cars. Started listing everything wrong with our life. I settled across from him, noting how his shoulders gradually relaxed as familiar comforts surrounded him. The kitchen walls displayed 40 years of family photographs, each one a testament to love surviving financial struggles. "Your mother and I survived worse storms," I reminded him gently. "Remember the year I got laid off from the plant? We ate beans and rice for months, but you two never fought like Sarah and I do." Jonah took his first real bite, savoring the flavors of childhood. "She doesn't understand that at work isn't guaranteed income." Outside, March evening light faded slowly through windows Martha had chosen for their view of her rose garden. I planted those bushes this spring after you were born, hoping to give her beauty amid our modest circumstances. Son, marriage requires two people pulling the same direction. I passed him the bowl of potatoes. Sarah needs reminding of what matters most. Jonah's phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at it, then deliberately turned it face down. She's probably texting about something else we can't afford. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind shared between father and son across decades of similar conversations. I watched him slowly unwind, remembering the scared little boy who'd run to the same kitchen after playground fights. More meatloaf? I asked, already reaching for his plate. Please. His smile finally appeared, genuine and grateful. I forgot how much better I feel after talking with you. I served him another generous portion, then rose to clear our empty glasses. The apple pie, cooling on the counter, promised to restore his spirits completely. Some problems required patience and prayer. Others needed good food and family wisdom. Let me get dessert started, I said, stacking our dinner plates beside the sink. I carried the dinner plates to the sink, running warm water over the familiar ceramic patterns Martha had chosen 30 years ago. The apple pie sat cooling on the windowsill, its golden crust promising the perfect ending to our meal. Jonah looked more relaxed now, his earlier tension dissolving into the comfortable rhythm of family dinner. Your grandmother's recipe never fails, said, cutting to generous slices. The sweet aroma mixed with coffee created the exact atmosphere Martha used to orchestrate during difficult times. Jonah accepted his dessert with a grateful nod. I always feel better after eating here. Sarah's cooking comes from boxes and microwaves. I poured fresh coffee into our cups, settling back into my chair. Speaking of home improvements, Realtor called yesterday. Eleanor Vargas, I think her name was. My son took a bite of pie, nodding absently. Oh, yeah. What did she want? Offered $600,000 for the house. Jonah's fork froze halfway to his mouth. The bite of pie trembled on the tines as his eyes widened, processing numbers that clearly staggered him. 600,000. His voice climbed an octave. And you turned it down? I'm not planning to sell my house, I replied calmly, sipping coffee. The fork clattered against his plate as Jonah jumped from his chair. Dad, have you completely lost your mind? That's enormous money. He began pacing again, this time with manic energy rather than frustration. What could be done with $600,000? I watched my son transform before my eyes. The grateful, relaxed man who'd been enjoying family comfort vanished, replaced by someone calculating dollar signs. His entire body language shifted, leaning forward, eyes bright with possibility, hands gesturing wildly. Jonah, sit down and finish your pie. Finish my pie? He spun toward me, incredulous. Dad, we're talking about more money than most people see in a lifetime. Sarah would stop complaining forever. Rebecca and Michael could attend any college they wanted. The children have college funds already. Basic state school funds, he corrected sharply. This money could send them to Harvard, Yale, anywhere they dreamed. He planted both hands on the table, leaning toward me intensely. You could live comfortably for the rest of your life without worrying about expenses. I set down my coffee cup carefully. What makes you think I'm worrying about expenses now? Dad, you're 75 years old. 65, I corrected. 65. Then you shouldn't be maintaining this big house alone. Think about assisted living communities, traveling, enjoying retirement properly. His voice carried the persuasive tone he used in business meetings. 600,000 could change everything. The evening light had faded completely now, leaving us in the warm glow of kitchen lamps. I studied my son's face, seeing a stranger wearing familiar features. When had money become more important than family history? Eleanor Vargas mentioned developers wanting the entire block. I said quietly, planning to tear down all these houses for condominiums. Even better, Jonah's enthusiasm disturbed me. That means property values will skyrocket. Other neighbors probably got similar offers. You could be the last holdout, Dad. The last holdout, I repeated slowly. Yes, which gives you negotiating power. If they need your property to complete the development, you could demand 700,000, maybe 800. He pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. I'm looking up comparable sales in the area right now. I watched him research my home's value like a commodity to be traded. The same hands that had learned to tie shoes at this table now calculated profit margins on my life's work. Found it, he announced triumphantly. Houses on Maple Street sold for $650 last month. Dad, you're sitting on a gold mine and don't even realize it. What exactly would you do with all that money, son? I stood slowly, feeling every one of my 65 years in the simple movement. Come with me, Jonah. I want to show you something. He followed reluctantly, phone still clutched in his hand, clearly impatient for practical answers rather than sentimental detours. I led him from the kitchen through the dining room into the living room, where family photographs lined the mantelpiece like silent witnesses. This house isn't just property, son. I bought it in March 1985 after 10 years of saving every extra penny. I touched the silver frame, holding our wedding photo. Martha, radiant in white lace. Myself young and determined in a borrowed suit. We'd been living in that tiny apartment above Morrison's Hardware, dreaming of the space we wanted for our family. Jonah shifted impatiently behind me. Dad, that was 40 years ago. Times have changed. Your mother planted those roses by the front porch the first spring we lived here. I pointed through the window toward the dormant bushes that would bloom again in May. This living room is where you took your first steps, holding on to that coffee table. The same oak table still anchored the room's center, scarred by decades of use, but solid as ever. I remembered Martha refinishing it herself, determined to make our modest furniture beautiful through care and effort. I worked double shifts at the auto plant to pay off the mortgage early. I continued, moving to my reading chair by the coal fireplace. 40 years of my life have lived in these walls, Jonah. Every extra hour at the factory meant less debt, more security for you and your mother. Jonah checked his phone again, the blue glow reflecting off his impatient face. But Dad, it's just a house. Money matters more than sentiment in today's world. Just a house? The words hit like physical blows. I sank into my chair. the leather worn smooth by countless evenings of reading while Martha sewed nearby. Her basket still sat beside her favorite armchair, threads and needles waiting for hands that would never return. "Do you remember learning to ride your bicycle on this driveway?" I asked quietly. "Or building that treehouse in the backyard maple?" "Of course, I remember." His tone suggested childhood memories were luxuries he couldn't afford. But nostalgia doesn't pay for Rebecca's orthodontics or Michael's soccer camp. I studied my son's face in the lamplight, searching for traces of the boy who'd run crying to this same room after skinning his knees. When your mother got sick, we took out a second mortgage to pay for treatments. Insurance wouldn't cover. Know how long it took me to pay that off? Dad, please don't guilt-trip me about Mom's medical bills. 12 years, Jonah. 12 years of overtime shifts and weekend jobs. But we kept this house because it represented everything we built together. I gestured toward the height marks still visible on the doorframe leading to the hall. Your growth chart is carved into that wood. Your children's marks are there, too. Sentimental value doesn't appreciate like real estate, he said flatly. $600,000 could solve all my problems and secure your future simultaneously. I stared at him, finally understanding the depth of change in my son. The boy who'd once helped me repair these same walls now saw only monetary potential. In our family history, your problems, I repeated slowly. What about building something lasting for Rebecca and Michael? College tuition is lasting. Financial security is lasting. Jonah moved toward the window, looking out at Eleanor Vargas' promised development site. These old houses are just obstacles to progress, Dad. Sentimentality is a luxury we can't afford. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times, its familiar sound suddenly feeling foreign in the space between us. I'd wound that clock every Sunday morning for 30 years, teaching Jonah the ritual when he was 12. "So, should I sell?" I said quietly. "You should be practical." He turned from the window, his expression earnest but calculating. "Think about what's best for everyone involved." Silence stretched between us like a chasm. Then Jonah's expression shifted, calculation replacing dismissiveness. He stopped looking out the window and turned toward me with sudden energy. "Actually, Dad, I've been thinking about this all evening." His voice carried a new enthusiasm that made my skin crawl. "I figured out the perfect solution that helps both of us." I remained seated in my leather chair, hands gripping the worn armrests. "What solution?" "You sell the house, take care of my financial problems, and move in with Sarah and me." He began pacing again, but now with purpose rather than frustration. "Think about it. You'd be around your grandchildren every day." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. "Moving with you in your small townhouse with 2 active children. We'd make it work," he said, waving away practical concerns. "Rebecca could share Michael's room temporarily. You'd have the guest bedroom." I studied his face in the lamplight, searching for traces of genuine concern. "Temporarily? How long exactly?" "Well, if you're not comfortable with that arrangement, I could afford a really nice senior living facility." His tone brightened as if he'd solved every problem. "They have nurses on staff, organized activities, people your own age." The words struck like slaps. I rose slowly from my chair, backing toward the fireplace mantel, where Martha's photograph watched silently. I'm not planning to go anywhere, Jonah. This is my house. But, Dad, be reasonable. He stepped closer, his voice taking on the persuasive tone I'd heard him use with clients over the phone. You're living alone in this prominent place. What if you fall down the stairs? What if you have a medical emergency? I'm 65, not 95. Still, wouldn't you prefer having family nearby? Professional care if needed. He gestured broadly around the room. This house is too much for one person to maintain. I pressed my back against the mantel, feeling Martha's silver frame behind my shoulder. The same mantel where I'd hung Christmas stockings, where birthday cards had been displayed, where life celebrations had been anchored. The house is perfectly maintained, I said firmly, for now. But what about next year? 5 years from now? Jonah moved closer, his enthusiasm building. Dad, this is $600,000 we're discussing. Enough to solve my problems and guarantee your comfort simultaneously. Your problems, I repeated quietly. Our problems? He corrected quickly. Sarah's been so stressed about finances that it's affecting the children. Rebecca asked why we can't take the family vacation like her friends do. I watched him manipulate the situation, turning his wife's demands into family necessity. And selling my house solves that completely. His eyes brightened with assumed victory. I pay off the credit cards, catch up on the mortgage, and buy that car Sarah wants. You can receive professional care or live with a loving family. Loving family, I echoed. Of course, loving family. Why else would I be concerned about your future? He spread his arms wide, the picture of filial devotion. Dad, I'm trying to look out for both of us here. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced that I wondered how many times he'd rehearsed this conversation in his head. Pajaran's drive over, or Pearl, I was explaining the house's emotional value. I appreciate your concern, I said carefully, but I'm not selling my home. Jonah's smile faltered slightly. Dad, you're not thinking clearly about this. $600,000 could change everything. Everything's fine the way it is. Everything's not fine. The mask slipped for just a moment, revealing frustration underneath. Sarah's threatening divorce. My credit cards are maxed out, and you're sitting on more money than I'll see in 20 years. There it was, the truth finally emerging through cracks in his careful presentation. I straightened my shoulders, no longer backing toward the mantel. So, this is about your money problems, not my welfare. It's about both, he insisted, but his voice had lost its persuasive warmth. Dad, if you really loved me, you'd want to help when I'm struggling. If I really loved you. The words escaped before I could stop them. Jonah's helpful facade shattered completely, his face darkening with genuine anger. All pretense of filial concern evaporating in an instant. Yes, if you loved me, you'd help when I'm drowning financially. I gave you my entire life. I stepped away from the mantel, meeting his intensity with my own. Paid for your college education, helped with your first car down payment, covered your wedding expenses when you overspent. That was your duty as a father. He pointed an accusatory finger at me, his voice rising to fill the room. Parents are supposed to support their children. Support? Yes. Enable your poor decisions forever? No. Poor decisions? Jonah's voice cracked with indignation. I work 60 hours a week trying to provide for my family. Sarah has every right to expect a decent standard of living. I moved past him toward the hallway, no longer willing to be cornered in my own living room. A decent standard of living or keeping up with neighbors who earn twice your salary. He followed, his footsteps heavy against the hardwood floors. I refinished myself 15 years ago. You selfish old fool. You're sitting on a fortune while your son struggles, and you call it principle. I call it sanity. I reached the foyer, turning to face him near the front door. This house represents 40 years of marriage, of raising you, of building something lasting. Something lasting. Jonah grabbed his jacket from the hook beside the door, his movements sharp with fury. What's lasting about an empty house where an old man lives alone with his memories? The cruelty of the statement hit deeper than I expected. For a moment, I saw Martha's face clearly, remembered her laughter filling these same spaces that now echoed with our argument. Those memories built the life that raised you. I said quietly, well, those precious memories don't pay Rebecca's orthodontist or Michael's soccer registration. He yanked his arms through the jacket sleeves. You know what your problem is, Dad? You care more about dead wife and old furniture than your living son. The accusation struck like a physical blow. I stared at this stranger wearing my son's face, speaking words I never thought I'd hear from the child I'd sacrificed everything to raise. That living son just demanded I sell my home to solve his financial problems. I replied evenly, because that's what family does. Jonah pulled the zipper up with violent force. Real family helps each other instead of hiding behind sentimental nonsense. Real family doesn't make threats and ultimatums. Threats? He paused with his hand on the door knob, something dangerous flickering in his expression. I haven't made any threats yet, Dad. The temperature in the foyer seemed to drop 10. What's that supposed to mean? Jonah's smile was cold and calculating, entirely unlike the son I'd raised. It means if you won't sell voluntarily, I'll find another method. This house and that money will be mine eventually anyway. He yanked the door open so hard that the glass storm door rattled in its frame. Cold March air rushed into the warm foyer carrying the scent of rain and something darker. Eventually, I called after him, but he was already striding toward his car, leaving me standing in the doorway with his threat hanging in the air like smoke. The Honda's engine turned over with a grinding sound that matched my churning stomach. I watched his tail lights disappear round the corner, then slowly closed both doors. The house settled around me in sudden silence, but the warm comfort I'd always found here felt different now, changed, threatened. The silence that followed felt heavier than any sound. I stood in the foyer for several minutes, listening to the house settle round me. The familiar creaks and sighs that had once been comforting now seemed ominous. The grandfather clock in the hallway, the clock ticked steadily, marking time in a world that suddenly felt less secure. Eventually, I walked back toward the dining room, where our interrupted dinner still waited. Jonah's apple pie sat barely touched. Fork abandoned mid-bite when money had become more important than family dessert. I stacked the plates methodically, scraping the uneaten portions into the garbage disposal with mechanical precision. Shouldn't have told him about Eleanor Vargas. The thought circled through my mind as I carried dishes to the kitchen sink. Should have kept that information private. Handled it quietly, without involving him in decisions that weren't his to make. But even as I regretted the disclosure, I couldn't regret my position. After 40 years, I'd worked double shifts, overtime hours, and weekend maintenance jobs to pay off this house early. Not so some ungrateful person could decide my fate based on their immediate financial needs. I ran hot water over the dinner plates, watching as soap bubbles formed and dissolved. The routine was soothing. My hands worked automatically while my mind processed the evening's revelations. Through the kitchen window, darkness had entirely settled over the backyard, where Martha's rose garden waited for spring. The boy who'd helped me plant those roses was gone, replaced by someone who saw dollar signs where memories should be. When had gratitude transformed into entitlement? When had love become conditional on financial benefit? I dried each dish carefully, returning them to cabinets Martha had organized according to her own precise system. Her coffee cups still occupied the top shelf, though I hadn't used them since the funeral. Some things were too precious to risk breaking through careless daily use. The kitchen cleaning gave me time to think clearly about Jonah's parting threat. Another method, he'd said, as if my refusal was merely an obstacle to overcome rather than a final decision. What did a desperate IT manager with maxed-out credit cards and an angry wife consider as alternative methods? I folded the dish towel and hung it on the oven handle, exactly where it had belonged for 30 years. The familiar gesture steadied my nerves, reminding me that this was my domain, my sanctuary, my life's work made tangible in wood and stone. Whatever Jonah planned, he'd underestimated the man who'd raised him. I'd survived layoffs, Martha's illness, decades of financial struggle, and countless challenges that required more strength than he'd ever been tested with. His threats carried the desperate energy of someone who'd never truly fought for anything important. But they carried danger, too. Desperation made people unpredictable, and Jonah had revealed depths of selfishness that shocked even me. A son who could dismiss 40 years of family history as sentimental nonsense was capable of actions I didn't want to imagine. I turned off the kitchen lights, leaving only the small lamp above the stove burning. The house felt larger in the darkness. Rooms extending beyond my vision into spaces filled with decades of shared life. Every corner held memories Jonah had declared worthless. Every photograph represented moments he'd reduced to obstacles. Walking toward the stairs, I passed the living room where our argument had begun. The mantelpiece still held Martha's picture, her smile unchanging despite the evening's turmoil. She'd always believed Jonah would grow into a good man, always defended his childhood selfishness as temporary phases. She'd been wrong, but she'd also been gone 15 years. Spare the knowledge of what our son had become. The television news droned quietly in the living room for an hour after Jonah left. Voice is discussing local politics and weather forecasts. At the same time, I sat in my chair trying to process the evening's revelations. The familiar routine of watching late news helped settle my nerves, though my mind kept returning to that final threat about another method. Eventually, I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, each step creaking with 40 years of family footsteps. The house felt different tonight, not threatening exactly, but charged with possibility. I'd spent the past hour and 15 minutes trying to return to normal evening activities. But Jonah's words had poisoned the comfortable predictability of my routines. I changed into my pajamas methodically, hanging my clothes on the chair where Martha used to fold hers every night. Her jewelry box still sat on the dresser, silver brushes arranged precisely as she'd left them 15 years ago. Some evenings I could almost hear her humming while she prepared for bed. "Martha, if you could see how our son turned out," I whispered to her photograph on the nightstand. So greedy and disrespectful to the man who sacrificed everything for his future. Her smile remained unchanged. The same expression of love and hope she'd worn when that picture was taken on our 25th anniversary. She'd believed Jonah would mature into a good man, always defended his childhood selfishness as temporary growing pains. I walked to the bedroom window, checking the locks automatically, not from fear, but from the practical caution that came with living alone. The street looked peaceful under the yellow glow of the streetlights, with identical houses where neighbors slept, undisturbed by ungrateful children or financial threats. Settling on the bed's edge, I counted the specific sacrifices I'd made for Jonah over the years. College tuition $43,000 over for years, paid through overtime shifts and weekend maintenance work. Wedding expenses $12,000 when he and Sarah overspent their budget by half. First house down payment $8,000 to help them qualify for the mortgage. I paid for his education, his wedding, and helped with those grandchildren's expenses. I continued to support Martha's picture, and he calls me selfish for wanting to keep our home. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10:30. Its familiar sound marking another day's end in the house where I'd planned to die peacefully. Now that certainty felt threatened by someone who shared my blood, but none of my values. I brushed my teeth at the bathroom sink, the same routine I'd followed for decades. Martha's toothbrush still stood in the ceramic holder beside mine, though I'd replaced the head years ago, just to maintain the illusion of her presence. What disturbed me most wasn't Jonah's greed. I'd suspected that character flaw for years. What shocked me was his willingness to threaten his own father, to speak of other methods, as if my refusal was merely an obstacle to overcome rather than a final decision. Returning to bed, I pulled the covers up and reached for the lamp switch. The familiar darkness settled around me like an old friend, but sleep felt elusive. My mind kept circling back to that ominous promise, trying to imagine what desperate methods a financially struggling IT manager might consider. Outside, the March wind rattled bare tree branches against the roof, sounds that had comforted me for 40 years. But tonight seemed less peaceful. Every creak and settling sound made me wonder if Jonah's threats were idle anger or genuine warning. I closed my eyes, hoping exhaustion would overcome worry. But knowing this night would pass slowly, tomorrow would bring whatever consequences Jonah's desperation might produce. And I'd face them with the same determination that had carried me through decades of more complex challenges. A deep rumbling sound pulled me from uneasy sleep. I sat up in darkness, instantly alert, despite the fog of interrupted dreams. The bedside clock's red digits read to 45 a.m. too early for delivery trucks. Too late for legitimate visitors. The sound came again. Multiple car doors slamming in quick succession. Not the single thud of a neighbor returning home late. I swung my bare feet to the cold floor, moving toward the bedroom window with practiced silence. Parting the curtains just enough to peer out, I saw a dark pickup truck parked in my driveway. No license plate visible from this angle. Windows tinted black. Engine still running with vapor rising from the exhaust in the cold night air. 3 figures in dark clothing moved around the vehicle, their movements coordinated and purposeful. One carried what looked like a crowbar. Another held a large duffel bag. They weren't lost drivers asking for directions. "What is this?" I whispered to the empty room. "Who comes calling at this ungodly hour?" My stomach tightened as the pieces fell into place. Jonah's threat about another method echoing in my memory. The timing too convenient to be coincidence. He'd found people willing to do what he couldn't accomplish through manipulation and anger. The figures approached my front door, staying in the shadows cast by the porch overhang. Their voices carried faintly through the glass. Low-key professional discussions about entry points and timing. This wasn't random crime. This was a planned operation. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. 40 years of peaceful nights in this house. And now strangers planned to violate the sanctuary Martha and I had built together. One man circled toward the backyard, while the others remained at the front entrance. They were checking for the easiest access point, evaluating my home's vulnerabilities with the expertise of people who'd done this before. The soft sound of footsteps on gravel reached my ears as they moved around the foundation. Testing windows, no doubt, looking for unlocked doors or loose screens. My evening routine of checking locks suddenly seemed prophetic rather than merely careful. They're walking right up to the house, I breathed, pressing closer to the window frame. This isn't some mistaken address or coincidence. A metallic scraping sound drifted up from the first floor. Someone testing the back door handle or examining the lock mechanism. Professional criminals would have better tools than desperate amateurs. But the intent was unmistakably clear. I thought of Martha's jewelry box, the family photographs. 40 years of accumulated memories that meant nothing to these invaders, but represented the foundation of my entire life. They saw dollar signs where I saw irreplaceable history. The man at the back of the house rejoined his companions at the front entrance. Their hushed conference lasted perhaps 30 seconds before they began unpacking equipment from the duffel bag. Whatever they'd planned, the execution was starting now. My hands trembled slightly as adrenaline flooded my system. At 65, I hadn't expected to defend my home against multiple attackers. But circumstances rarely asked permission before demanding action. The scraping sound came again, more insistent this time. Metal against metal. The unmistakable noise of someone working on my front door lock with tools designed for illegal entry. No time for hesitation. I moved to the bedside table, grabbing the cordless phone with one hand while opening the bottom drawer with the other. Inside, beneath insurance papers and old receipts, lay the key to my gun safe. 911. What's your emergency? This is 1247 Maple Street, I said quietly, heading toward the bedroom closet. Unknown individuals are currently attempting to break into my residence. Sir, are you in immediate danger? Are the intruders inside your home? Not yet, but they're working on the front door lock. I count 3 of them, possibly more. I unlock the metal safe, withdrawing my registered shotgun and a box of shells. Please stay in a secure location. Patrol units are being dispatched to your address. Estimated arrival time is 15 to 20 minutes. 20 minutes. These people would be inside my house ransacking everything. Martha and I had built in less than 5 minutes if they knew their business. I'm legally armed and will defend myself if necessary, I informed the dispatcher, loading shells into the shotgun's chamber with practiced efficiency. Sir, I understand your concern, but please avoid confrontation if possible. Lock yourself in a secure room until officers arrive. I ended the call. Good advice for someone without military training or experience in home defense. But I hadn't spent 2 tours protecting other people's property to hide, while criminals destroyed my own. The shotgun felt solid in my hands. Familiar weight and balance from decades of hunting trips and periodic target practice. I checked the safety, chambered around, then moved toward the bedroom door with measured steps. Each stair creaked slightly under my bare feet as I descended, but the sounds from the front entrance covered any noise I made. Scraping metal, hushed instructions, the soft thud of someone testing the door's strength. At the bottom of the stairs, I positioned myself in the hallway with clear sight lines to both the front and back entrances. The foyer's hardwood floors would telegraph any intruder's movement, while the staircase behind me provided an escape route if circumstances demanded retreat. Through the front door's glass panels, shadowy figures moved with confident purpose. One knelt at the lock mechanism while another kept watch, a flashlight beam occasionally sweeping across the porch. Professional techniques suggested this wasn't their first residential break-in. The metallic scraping intensified, accompanied by a soft clicking sound. Locked tumblers being manipulated by someone with proper tools and training. My front door's deadbolt had protected this house for 15 years. But determined criminals with specialized equipment could defeat most residential security measures. I raised the shotgun to ready position, finger alongside the trigger guard, safety still engaged, but easily accessible. The weapon's presence steadied my nerves while amplifying the gravity of what might happen. In the next few minutes, 15 minutes until police arrival, these intruders would gain entry within 2 or 3 minutes if they maintained their current pace. That left me alone with multiple criminals for at least 12 minutes. An eternity in a home invasion situation. The lock mechanism gave way with a soft metallic snap. The deadbolt had been defeated. The metallic scraping intensified, accompanied by frustrated whispers just beyond the wooden barrier that separated me from 3 armed intruders. I raised the shotgun to ready position, finger moving to the trigger guard. Safety still engaged but instantly accessible. I'm armed. I called through the door, my voice carrying the authority of someone who meant every word. Police are already en route. Get away from my property now. The scraping stopped immediately. Hushed, urgent voices replaced the methodical sounds of lock manipulation. Wait, he really has a gun in there. Are you kidding me? No, nobody mentioned weapons. Then I heard it. The third voice, lower than the others, but unmistakably familiar in its cadence and pronunciation. The same voice that had threatened me hours earlier about finding another method. Let's get out of here fast. This isn't worth getting shot over. My stomach clenched as recognition crystallized. That slight emphasis on certain syllables, the particular way he shaped his words. Speech patterns I'd listened to for 38 years. From first baby sounds to tonight's criminal instructions. Move back to the truck. Footsteps scrambled across gravel as my warning achieved its intended effect. Professional criminals might have persisted with better planning, but these amateurs had expected an easy target. An elderly man sleeping peacefully while they ransacked his home for quick profit. I maintained my defensive position, listening to their retreat, but keeping the weapon ready. Through the glass panels of the doors, shadowy figures ran toward the dark pickup truck, abandoning their tools and plans in favor of immediate escape. The engine turned over with a grinding sound. The exact Honda I'd watched disappear hours earlier, now serving double duty for family visits and criminal enterprises. Tires squealed against asphalt as they accelerated down Maple Street, leaving behind only tool marks on my door and the bitter knowledge of family betrayal. And don't even think about coming back, I shouted after them, though their tail lights were already disappearing around the corner. Silence settled over the house again, broken only by my own heavy breathing and the grandfather clock's steady ticking. The immediate threat had passed, but the larger implications were just beginning to sink in. My own son had sent criminals to my home, not strangers seeking random profit, but people he'd recruited and directed to steal what he couldn't manipulate me into giving freely. The boy I'd raised, educated, and supported through decades of sacrifice had crossed every possible line of decency. I kept the shotgun ready, knowing that desperate people sometimes returned when initial attempts failed. However, these particular criminals had personal stakes that went beyond mere profit. They couldn't risk exposure through persistence or violence against a family member. The police dispatcher had promised rival within 20 minutes of my call. That left me perhaps 10 more minutes alone with my thoughts, my weapon, and the devastating realization that my relationship with Jonah was not just damaged, but completely destroyed. Through the foyer window, streetlights illuminated empty sidewalks, where neighbors slept peacefully, unaware that criminal activity had just been thwarted 3 houses down from their own front doors. Their trust in community safety remained intact while mine had been shattered by blood relation. I maintained my defensive stance, listening for any sound of return while processing what this night meant for my future. The house Martha and I had built together was no longer the sanctuary we'd intended. It had become a target marked by our own son's greed and desperation. Red and blue lights strobed across my front yard at exactly 3:15 a.m., 20 minutes after my emergency call. 2 patrol cars and an unmarked sedan pulled to the curb with professional efficiency. Officers emerging with flashlights and practiced caution. I set the shotgun safely aside, disengaged all locks, and opened the front door to meet Detective Ramirez, a compact woman in her 40s, whose sharp eyes immediately assessed both the door damage and my composed demeanor. "Mr. Myers, I'm Detective Ramirez. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" "No injuries, Detective. They never made it inside." I gestured toward the scratch lock mechanism and Jimmy doorframe. 3 men with professional tools, but they retreated when I announced I was armed. Officer Lee, a younger man with military bearing, knelt to examine the tool marks, while his partner photographed the damage from multiple angles. Their methodical approach suggested this wasn't their first residential break-in investigation. "Can you describe these intruders, sir?" "Dark clothing, organized approach. They arrived in a pickup truck without visible license plates." I chose my words carefully, providing accurate information while avoiding speculation about family connections. "Did you hear them speaking to each other?" I hesitated, weighing family loyalty against civic duty. "Some conversation during their retreat. One voice seemed familiar, but in the darkness and stress makes it difficult to be entirely sure." Detective Ramirez made notes in a leather-bound pad. "Familiar how?" "Like a neighbor, co-worker, someone from your daily routine." "Possibly." The lie tasted bitter, but accusing my own son without absolute proof felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Sound carries strangely at night. Officer Lee completed his exterior examination, then moved to the backyard with a powerful flashlight. "Detective, we've got clear tire impressions in the driveway and footprints around the foundation." They checked multiple entry points before settling on the front door. "Professional assessment or amateur hour?" "Bit of both. Good planning and decent tools." But they flinched easily when confronted with resistance. Detective Ramirez nodded, still taking notes. "Mr. Myers, any idea why someone would target your home specifically? Expensive electronics, jewelry, cash kept on premises?" I considered mentioning the recent real estate interest, but decided that information might lead to uncomfortable questions about family finances. "Nothing obvious. Standard household items. No significant valuables. Any recent disputes with neighbors, contractors, service workers? Anyone who might know your daily routine or when you're typically home?" The question hit closer to truth than she realized. "No neighbor problems. I keep to myself mostly." Officer Lee returned from his perimeter check. No signs they attempted entry elsewhere. Front door was definitely their target. Probably scouted in advance. Security cameras in the area. We'll canvass the neighborhood, but most residential systems don't cover the street very well. Detective Ramirez closed her notepad. "Myers will file this as attempted burglary with a weapon deterrent. Unfortunately, without clear descriptions of the suspect or license plates. Our investigation options are limited." I nodded, understanding the reality of law enforcement resources and the priorities of cases. "I appreciate your quick response. The deterrent effect worked as intended. You handled the situation well. Legal firearm ownership, proper defensive positioning, clear warnings before any escalation." She handed me a business card. "Case number 2025, the row 3847. Call if you remember any additional details or if you notice suspicious activity. After they finished photographing evidence and collecting their reports, the officers departed with professional courtesy and realistic expectations. The case would be filed, investigated preemptually, and eventually closed without resolution. I stood alone in my foyer, again, surveying the damaged door frame that would need professional repair. The cost was manageable, but the symbolism was devastating. My own son had literally tried to break down the barriers I built to protect family security. Dawn was still hours away, leaving me with time to process what this night meant for every future day in the house. Martha and I had called home. 3 months later, I sat on the terrace of my new condominium in Phoenix, watching the sun rise over the Sonoran Desert Mountains. The Arizona heat had already begun its daily assault by 6:30 a.m., but I preferred harsh clarity to Ohio's deceptive seasonal changes. The legal documents spread across my patio table told the complete story of my transformation. Eleanor Vargas had indeed been accurate about market demand. Competitive bidding had driven my house's final sale price to $650,000, $50,000 more than her original estimate. Jonah would never know I'd received more than expected. He'd probably spent months calculating how to access that originally $600,000. He never imagined his father had vanished entirely from Ohio, taking additional resources with him and leaving no forwarding information. Detective Ramirez's case file had remained officially open, but practically dormant. No suspects have been identified. No additional evidence has been found, and a resolution is unlikely. The attempted break-in had become another unsolved property crime in Akron statistics, precisely as I'd expected when family loyalty prevented complete cooperation. My new address existed in no database that connected to my former life. No phone number. No forwarding mail service, no social media presence that might allow accidental discovery. I'd severed every possible connection to the people who'd betrayed 40 years of paternal sacrifice. The condominium's modern efficiency stood in stark contrast to the accumulated memories of Maple Street. No family photographs cluttered surfaces. Martha's jewelry box did not occupy the dresser. No height marks scarred door frames. Everything here served function rather than sentiment. Yet Martha's presence remained strong in my daily routine. I brought her favorite coffee mug, the one she'd used every morning for 20 years. Speaking to her memory had become easier in this neutral space, away from rooms haunted by both love and disappointment. Justice doesn't always arrive the way you expect. Martha, I said aloud, addressing the mountain landscape she'd never seen. But it arrives eventually. Rebecca's school photograph sat on my kitchen counter, the only family image I'd preserved during my move. My granddaughter's smile reminded me that innocent people existed within complicated family dynamics. Even when their parents had chosen greed over gratitude, I'd established a savings account in her name at a Phoenix bank, contributing monthly amounts that would accumulate significantly by her 18th birthday. She'd never know her grandfather had provided for her college education, but the money would be waiting when she needed it most. Jonah had probably noticed my disappearance by now. Failed phone calls, returned mail, Empty house eventually sold by real estate agents he couldn't contact. His other method had achieved precisely the opposite of its intended effect. The desert heat intensified as morning progressed, reminding me that this harsh landscape rewarded careful adaptation while punishing the unprepared. I'd spent 65 years learning those lessons in Ohio's industrial environment, and they translated perfectly to Arizona's natural challenges. By noon, I'd be inside with air conditioning and afternoon routines that belonged entirely to me. No family obligations, no manipulation attempts, no threats disguised as concern for my welfare. The phoenix of legend rose from ashes of destruction, transformed by fire into something more substantial and more beautiful than its original form. My own resurrection had required leaving behind everything familiar, but the freedom was worth every sacrifice. If you like this story, please enjoy this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.